Greetings, this is Pastor Jared once again, bringing you some books that are worth checking out. This is where I would recommend a few books by a certain author, and if there's something you want to dive into. This week, this is a challenge, because the guy that I'm going to suggest to you is somebody that wrote nearly 400 years ago, and he's a little bit hard to dive into unless you're ready for the challenge of trying to read slowly and pick up the Old English and to dive in. So some of you have already tuned out, and that's okay. But I was reflecting on, there's these books that are published by a place called Banner of Truth, and they have sides that look like that, Puritan paperbacks, and you can see them right up here in my shelf. In fact, actually this entire shelf is my Puritan shelf. And I noticed that I would read through some of these and would get a little bit of something out of it, and some of them I would really get a lot out of. And then I noticed the ones that I was always getting a lot out of were the ones by a guy named Thomas Watson. What were these books that I got a lot out of? Usually you had to be in the mood to say, I need to figure out this subject. And so I would start reading with that in mind. One of the things was, why does God in his providence govern the world the way that he does? Then I picked up All Things for Good, and Watson just really goes through and in a series of sermons for his people, just talks about why even the worst things work for the good of the godly. That's the name of one of his sermons. What a great name for a sermon, how the worst things work for the good of his people. It's about looking at God's providence and not merely trying to get away from it or around it, but to say, why does God do this for our good? Why does he allow these things for our good? This is golden. This is such a good thing just to read through slowly over coffee in the morning, where you have energy and time to put into it. Another time I was really struggling with, what do we mean by repentance, and how do I get deeper in my understanding of what it means to turn from sins and take joy in God instead of in my sins. Doctrine of Repentance really has a lot of golden nuggets in it. I remember I was collecting sayings from the Puritans, and so many of them came from this book of just little golden nuggets that you'll find in that book. I also remember in Illinois I started this group that was called Dead Theologians Society, where when I was an assistant pastor, I would take a few of the people from the church and we'd read through an old book. And one of the ones that we went through was The Great Gain of Godliness. Believe it or not, this is based off of just, I think, 3 verses in Malachi, as he's going through in Malachi chapter 3. And there's just a lot of reflections that he has, that these can be launching points for other reflections that he has of why be godly? Is there any gain in it? Do we get anything out of it? Do we have any benefit for it? And his answer is yes. In fact, we do. In fact, that's why Paul says it, right? There is great gain in godliness, he says to Timothy. The other thing that I have on my shelf that is really helpful is I almost use Watson as a reference book. He has a series of books called the Body of Divinity. Actually, I have the older version that has, but this is actually the full, thicker version, because here he talks about doctrines of the faith, such as the Trinity, the Incarnation. And then he also goes on to do the 10 Commandments and the Lord's Prayer. Now, I'm glad I have this edition that has them all. This only has the one, and then they make you buy the other one separately. But it's just a great, like, if you're just working through what does the 8th commandment really even mean, you will not get a fuller explanation than what Watson does. In fact, at the end of it, you may say, that is even way more than I even wanted to know. But he is thorough and very helpful if you're like, I really want to know what this doctrine means in detail. And he basically follows the structure of the shorter catechism as he's going through and explains parts of doctrine. And so if you're wanting to see somebody who does that thoroughly and systematically, Watson is your guy. But I think I would start first either with All Things for Good, which is a great reflection on how God uses events in our lives for his glory and our good, and also The Great Gain of Godliness. Just a great reflection on the fact that it's good to to be godly. It's good for us to follow after the way that God has given for us. So that's my author for this week. If you're willing to dive in, have a little bit of depth and say, I'm going to try a Puritan for once. This is my favorite Puritan, maybe besides John Owen. But this is my favorite Puritan that you maybe have not heard of, Thomas Watson. He's really worth checking out some of his works and really diving in there. So that's my recommendation for this week, Thomas Watson and his works. Thanks.